All right. So, again, welcome. This is our last lesson of our Reconstruction era home note videos. I want to remind you of our essential questions. Did the end of the Civil War and slavery lead to peace based on liberty and justice for all? Why or why not? And were African Americans closer to the American ideals of liberty, justice, and citizenship at the end of the Reconstruction era? Now, we just got finished learning about congressional reconstruction and the fact that 1/5 of Congress was made up of African Americans, which was absolutely awesome and significant and important. But now let's talk about the end of Reconstruction. And it officially ended in 1877. And again, you can refer to section 22.5 in your textbook. Definitely, we know that with the beginning of the Black laws in 1865, there was backlash to freed African Americans. And I'm sure that all of you are familiar with the Ku Klux Klan. This was America's terrorist group. And we will talk a little bit more about this terrorist group later on in class. But I want you to realize that the Ku Klux Klan, or the KKK, is a major factor in the end of Reconstruction. What also brought about the end of Reconstruction for the United States was the election of 1876, the Compromise of 1877. Basically, Southern whites were allowed to vote again because of the Amnesty Act of 1872, right in time for our election of 1876. There were two candidates who were running for president in 1876. For the Democratic side, it was Tilden, and for the Republican side, it was Hayes. Compromise of 1877. Long story short, there was a dispute over the amount of electoral votes for both candidates. Of course, you might not be familiar with what is meant by electoral votes. Don't worry about that. Just know that both sides were upset by the election results. So there was a compromise, and we are all familiar with compromises. Okay, in order to come to an agreement, both sides have to give up something. So Hayes, from the Republican Party, would become president if he withdrew all federal troops from the southern states. And that is exactly what happened. When the federal troops left the southern states, Southern Democrats were able to quickly take over the South again. That means that there was really no federal or national support for reconstructing the southern states, for protecting and making sure that the southern states were following their laws and their rules and their new state constitutions. And this, in my opinion, was a sad day for the former Confederate states. And this was the end of Reconstruction. So, what happened as a result of the Southern Democrats gaining control by 1877? Well, they cut funding for public schools. You might remember that the Freedmen's Bureau was created to help support newly freed Black Americans by providing free public schools. The Southern Democrats also required poll taxes and literacy tests. These were things that disenfranchised or prevented African Americans from being able to vote. A poll tax is basically a tax or money that you have to pay, not at an actual poll, like a flagpole, but the voting poll, okay? And a literacy test. Literacy test is basically a test to see if you can read and write. Now, how are you supposed to pass a literacy test if you have cut, or if funding for a public school that's supposed to teach you how to read and write has been cut? Many public schools in the South were closed by 1877, or because of the Compromise of 1877. Additionally, Jim Crow laws were passed. These were laws that enforced segregation of Black people and white people in the South. And unfortunately, We had a Supreme Court case in 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson. The decision of this case said that Jim Crow laws are constitutional and don't violate the 14th Amendment as long as the public facilities available to both black and white people were roughly equal. So perhaps you've heard of the phrase separate but equal. That is this case is where that phrase comes from. And the significance of this Supreme Court case was that it legalized segregation and it said that it was okay to separate the races. But we all know that the separation of these races did not result in equal, what's the word I'm looking for? The best conditions or equal conditions for public schools, for access to medical care, just to restaurants, just things and various activities that you would do in society that you would hope to be able to do as an American citizen, as a human being. Those facilities and services were not equally available to you if you were African American because of Jim Crow laws and because the Supreme Court basically legalized these laws and said it was okay and constitutional. Okay, so now we are at the end of this lesson series. Take a moment to answer the question: did the end of the Civil War and slavery lead to peace based on liberty and justice for all? Why or why not? And were African Americans closer to the American ideals of liberty, justice, and citizenship at the end of the Reconstruction era?